The discovery. You ever walk into a stranger's house and feel your entire world tilt off its axis? That's exactly what happened to me the night I stumbled across a photo of my 4-year-old self hanging in a gold frame in the private hallway of the Blackwell mansion. My name is Jasmine, and I've been working catering jobs around Chicago for years. These high society events were all the same, rich people sipping champagne while treating servers like furniture. I'd grown used to being invisible, just another face in the background carrying trays and refilling glasses. But this night was different. The Blackwell mansion sat in the heart of Chicago's wealthiest district, the kind of place where stepping on the marble probably cost more than my monthly rent. I was balancing a tray of champagne glasses when I took a wrong turn looking for the kitchen. That's when I saw it. Wild hair, pink dress, awkward little smile, there I was, age 4, hanging on the wall like a family heirloom. For a split second, I thought maybe I was hallucinating from all the cheap perfume and exhaustion. But no, that was definitely me. I almost dropped the entire tray right there. I'd grown up in the foster system, shuffled from one home to another. The story was always the same, lost records, tragic circumstances, nobody could give me real answers. I'd learned pretty early not to get my hopes up about finding my real family. But here was my childhood face staring back at me from the private wing of Richard Blackwell's mansion. The same Richard Blackwell who'd brushed past me half an hour earlier without so much as a glance. "Hey, what are you doing here?" A security guard's voice yanked me back to reality. "Sorry, got lost looking for the restroom," I lied, keeping my cool while burning every detail of that photo into my memory. Back in the main hall, I watched Richard Blackwell work the crowd. He was polished, charismatic, holding court about his charitable foundation for underprivileged kids. The irony hit me like a truck. Here was the philanthropist of the year talking about helping abandoned children while his own abandoned daughter's photo sat hidden on his wall. As I watched him speak, I noticed something. Little cracks in his performance. A flicker of guilt when he talked about second chances. A hesitation when he mentioned personal tragedy. "I lost my daughter years ago," he told the crowd. "That grief drove me to help others find what I couldn't give her." That's when it clicked. He hadn't lost me. He'd left me behind. Something inside me snapped right then. I was going to get answers. And Richard Blackwell was going to explain every night I'd wondered why I wasn't good enough to be loved. But first, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about finding my father, this was about uncovering why a successful businessman would abandon his 4-year-old daughter and then hang her photo like some twisted memorial. As the evening wound down and I collected empty glasses, I made a decision. I was going to dig into Richard Blackwell's past, no matter what it took. Something told me that photo was just the tip of the iceberg, and the truth buried underneath was going to be darker than I ever imagined. The investigation. 2 days later, I still couldn't shake the image of that photo. I needed answers, but this was Richard Blackwell we were talking about, CEO, board member, patron of orphanages, king of spin. The man was untouchable. That's when I remembered Marcus, the old bartender who'd worked every elite event in Chicago for the past 30 years. If there was dirt to be found, he'd know where it was buried. I found Marcus at his usual spot behind the bar at Romano's, pouring himself coffee between shifts. "Blackwell?" He nearly choked on his drink. "Honey, you don't want to mess with that man. He's got more tentacles than an octopus." "Why do you say that?" I pressed, trying to keep it casual while polishing glasses. Marcus looked around the empty bar, then leaned in close. "There are old rumors," he whispered. "He had a daughter who vanished. His wife died in some weird accident when the girl was 4. After that, he inherited a fortune. The girl was never heard from again, like she just evaporated." Chills ran down my spine. 4 years old. The same age I was in that photo. And now, Marcus continued, his voice thick with sarcasm, he cleans his conscience running charities for orphans. "You really think that's a coincidence?" That night, I dove into the world of online detective work. Fake social media accounts, archived newspaper searches, public records, anything I could get my hands on. What I found painted a disturbing picture. Richard had married 3 more times after his first wife died. Always younger women, always with ironclad prenups, and every marriage was over within 2 years. But more importantly, I uncovered old news clippings about Helena Blackwell, my mother. She'd been a fierce advocate for kids in the system, always fighting for reform. The last article before her death mentioned she was investigating shady adoption agencies. 2 weeks later, she was gone. I needed professional help. That's when I turned to Margaret Santos, a retired private investigator who nursed her morning cappuccinos at the cafe where I worked part-time. "Margaret, I need a favor," I said one morning, pouring her usual. Her eyes lit up with that familiar spark of curiosity. "You need more than luck, kid. You need proof." I told her everything, every wild, painful detail. She listened, scribbling notes in her worn leather notebook. "Sweetheart," she said finally, "you're not just searching for a father. You're chasing a predator. And I think your mother tried to warn someone too." Margaret dove into the archives with the skill of someone who'd spent decades uncovering secrets. What she found turned my world upside down. Richard had faked documents claiming I died in the same accident as my mother. He'd even collected life insurance on both of us, $500,000. But it got worse. Helena had hired a private investigator of her own 2 weeks before she died, convinced Richard was running some kind of illegal adoption ring. That investigator had vanished right after Helena did. There it was, plain as day. Richard Blackwell hadn't just abandoned his family, he'd profited from our disappearance, built his reputation on the ashes of our lives, and thought he'd gotten away with it. But Margaret saved the worst for last. She showed me a hospital report that made my blood run cold. Helena had survived the crash. She died hours later in a hospital bed, and her last words to the nurse were, "Protect my little girl from the monster." That was the moment I knew Richard Blackwell had tried to bury us both. But he never counted on a ghost coming back for revenge. The question now was how to make him pay for what he'd done, not just to me, but to my mother and who knows how many other families. The next Blackwell Foundation Gala was just 2 weeks away. It was time to plan my comeback. The truth revealed. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but I needed the full picture before I made my move. Margaret and I spent the next week digging deeper, and what we uncovered was more sinister than either of us had imagined. Richard's adoption scheme wasn't just about money, it was about control. He'd been working with corrupt agencies to falsify records, making children disappear from the system. Some were sold to wealthy families who didn't ask questions. Others, like me, were simply erased when they became inconvenient. My mother Helena had been close to exposing everything. Her investigation had led her to discover that Richard was using his charity connections to identify vulnerable children. When she confronted him, threatening to go to the authorities, he made sure she'd never get the chance. "Look at this," Margaret said, spreading hospital records across my kitchen table. "Helena didn't die from the car crash. The toxicology report shows she was poisoned while recovering in the hospital." My hands shook as I read the details. Someone had injected something into her foreline. The official cause of death was listed as complications from the accident, but the truth was right there in black and white. "He killed her," I whispered. "And then he made you disappear," Margaret added. "Probably figured a 4-year-old would be easy to place quietly somewhere far away. He just didn't count on you growing up and finding your way back." That's when Margaret showed me the recording device she'd been carrying. "I paid a visit to Richard's old lawyer yesterday," she said with a sly smile. "Funny thing about lawyers, some of them get nervous when retired cops start asking questions about their clients' suspicious activities from 20 years ago." She pressed play, and Richard's voice filled my kitchen. "I handled the problem. Helena was getting too close, asking too many questions. The girl was just collateral damage. But it's all taken care of now," both of them are officially dead, the insurance paid out, and nobody's looking for either one anymore. I felt sick to my stomach, but also strangely relieved. Finally, I had proof of what had really happened that night when I was 4 years old. There's more, Margaret continued. That private investigator Helena hired. His name was David Torres. His body was found in the Chicago River 3 days after Helena died. The police ruled it a suicide, but you don't believe that. Not for a second. Richard cleaned house, eliminating anyone who could expose his operation. As the full scope of Richard's crimes became clear, I realized this wasn't just about getting revenge for my childhood. This was about justice for my mother, for David Torres, and for all the children who disappeared into Richard's network over the years. The FBI had been investigating similar cases for months without making the connection to Richard's charity. Margaret had contacts there from her police days, and they were very interested in our evidence file. They want to coordinate with whatever you're planning, she told me. But they need him to confess publicly, something that can't be dismissed or covered up by his lawyers. The upcoming gala would be perfect. Cameras, journalists, Chicago's elite, all watching as Richard Blackwell stood on stage talking about helping children while secretly destroying their lives. I spent the next few days preparing. Not just gathering evidence, but preparing myself emotionally for what I was about to do. I was going to confront the man who'd murdered my mother and erased my existence. The man who'd built his fortune on our graves. But I wasn't that scared 4-year-old anymore. I was 24, I knew the truth, and I had the proof to back it up. Richard Blackwell was about to learn that some ghosts don't stay buried. The night before the gala, I looked at myself in the mirror. Tomorrow, I would walk back into the world of the Chicago elite. But this time, I wouldn't be invisible. This time, I'd be the one calling the shots. It was time to give Richard Blackwell the surprise of his life. The confrontation. The Blackwell Foundation Gala was a circus, cameras flashing, millionaires sipping champagne, and Richard on stage preaching about second chances. Dressed as a waitress one last time, I slipped through the crowd with my tray and my plan. Margaret was positioned near the back with her camera, while FBI agents had quietly stationed themselves around the room. Everything was in place. When Richard launched into his speech about the pain of losing a daughter, I took a deep breath, set down my tray, and marched straight up to the stage. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwell," I said, taking the microphone from his surprised hands. "Can I ask you a question?" The room went dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Richard glared at me, his composure slipping slightly. "Miss, shouldn't you be serving drinks?" "Of course," I replied with a smile. "But as the daughter of orphans, your story really hit home. Especially when you mentioned losing your daughter. Would you care to elaborate?" His practiced smile wavered. "It was a personal tragedy. I'd rather not discuss it." "That's a shame," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear. "Because I have some details about your daughter that I think people will find very interesting. You ever see a man's world shatter in real time?" Richard's mask slipped right off his face. "First," I continued, "your daughter didn't die in that accident. Second, you abandoned her after making sure her mother wouldn't be around to talk." I paused for effect. "Third, she's standing right in front of you. Got anything to say, Dad?" Pandemonium erupted. Richard stammered, reaching for the microphone, but I stepped back, pulling out my envelope of evidence. "Here are your fake death certificates," I announced, holding up the documents. "Here's proof you pocketed the insurance money. And here's the autopsy report showing Helena Blackwell was poisoned in the hospital, not killed in a crash." The crowd gasped. Reporters were already pulling out their phones, recording everything. For good measure, I signaled to Margaret, who projected a photo onto the screen behind us, my childhood photo from Richard's hallway, with, "To the best dad in the world, I love you, Jasmine," written on the back in my 4-year-old handwriting. "You planned all this?" Richard whispered, finally realizing he'd been outplayed. I looked him dead in the eye. Of course I did. You taught me to play the long game, didn't you? Revenge is best served cold, and Dad, this one's been chilling for 20 years. Richard tried to deny everything, but it was too late. The journalists were already downloading the evidence I'd emailed them 5 minutes earlier, including the secret recording of Richard admitting to his lawyer that he'd handled the problem. You have no proof, he shouted desperately. Actually, I said calmly, the FBI says my evidence is more than enough. As if on cue, federal agents stepped forward, badges visible. The room erupted in chaos as donors headed for the exits and cameras continued rolling. Richard's face went white as the handcuffs clicked into place. Helena Blackwell died trying to protect children from men like you, I called out as they led him away. Today, she finally got her justice. As the sirens wailed outside and the room emptied, I stepped down from the stage. Margaret appeared at my side, grinning from ear to ear. How does it feel? She asked. I looked around at the chaos we'd created, the abandoned champagne glasses, the scattered evidence, the reporters frantically making phone calls. Like I can finally breathe, I said. For 20 years, I'd wondered why I wasn't good enough to be loved. Now I knew the truth, it was never about me. It was about a monster who destroyed anyone who threatened his perfect facade. But the real victory wasn't just Richard's arrest. It was knowing that my mother's final wish had finally come true. Her little girl was protected from the monster, and now the monster couldn't hurt anyone else. The invisible waitress had just made headlines around the world. But more importantly, the daughter who came back from the dead had finally come home. The redemption. 6 months later, the Blackwell name was mud. The feds had frozen the foundation's accounts and discovered that only a tiny fraction of donations actually reached kids. Most of it had paid for Richard's art collection, luxury cars, and vacations. The rest had been laundered through his illegal adoption network. As for me, I was sitting in his old office, looking at the new plaque on the door, Helena Blackwell Foundation, Executive Director, Jasmine Mitchell. Funny how life works out. The invisible waitress had become a national headline, and the daughter who came back from the dead was now running the show. Marcus, now our events coordinator, loved to joke about it. You're more famous than he ever was, and it only took you 20 minutes to destroy him. Margaret, now my right hand and head of investigations, put it best, he used your tragedy to build an empire. Now you're using his money to do real good. And we were. We'd rebuilt orphanages, sent kids to college, and reunited dozens of families that Richard's network had torn apart. The press loved the story, but the real payoff was personal. I'd tracked down my mother's sister Sarah, who thought I'd died 20 years ago. When we finally met, she hugged me like she was never letting go. We spent nights piecing together Helena's legacy, finishing the work she'd started, shutting down crooked agencies and putting 47 bad actors behind bars. The FBI said our case file was airtight. Richard got 25 years, and his old friends vanished faster than his fake charitable donations. Even his golf club scrubbed his name off their trophy. He wrote me letters from prison, claiming he was young and stupid, begging for forgiveness. I never replied. Some wounds you don't forgive, but that's not the legacy I wanted to build. The real legacy was in the kids. Hundreds of letters poured in. Scholarships that changed lives. Little victories that meant everything. One day I got a note from a girl named Amanda. She was going to Harvard, she said, and our foundation had made her believe her future could be different. Another young man wrote that he wanted to be a lawyer, just like you, Jasmine. Families reunited. Children adopted into loving homes. Futures rewritten. That was the real win. During an interview on CNN, Anderson Cooper asked if I was still angry. Anger's a luxury I can't afford, I told him. Richard Blackwell tried to erase me, but all he did was give me a blank page to write my own story. The difference between us? He used tragedy to help himself. I use it to help others. Last week, I visited Helena's grave with a new headstone: mother, activist, heroine. Her daughter completed the mission. I left her a bouquet and whispered, "We did it, Mom." My phone buzzed with a news alert: another record month for donations, more kids getting the shot at life she never had. These days, when I look out from my apartment window over the Chicago skyline, I realize the best revenge wasn't destroying Richard Blackwell, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel damn good. The best revenge was becoming everything he pretended to be, and more. So what do you think? Can a family broken by greed ever really heal? Are some scars too deep, even when justice is finally served? I've learned that true victory isn't just surviving the storm, it's learning to dance in the rain, and then teaching others how to find their rhythm too. Sometimes the wildest endings are the ones we need most. Sometimes the little girl who disappeared grows up to become the woman who saves others from disappearing too. And sometimes, just sometimes, the ghosts we think are haunting us turn out to be the angels who guide us home. The end.